Welcome to Life in the Bubble. My name is Lydia, and I'm here with Nate and Krista to talk about our homeschool experiences within Christian fundamentalism. The three of us were homeschooled in the 90s and early 2000s, and this is our conversation about the ways that we're starting to pursue healing in adulthood. Thanks, everyone, so much for joining us here at Life in the Bubble. We are super excited tonight because, as you know, in the past several episodes, we've all been sharing our stories, and you've gotten to hear from Krista and also from myself. Well, tonight we're going to be hearing some of Nate's story, and I'm really excited because, obviously he and Krista are siblings, but I'm just thrilled to hear more about Nate's perspective on homeschooling. So, Nate, what do you want to open with tonight?
Well, I really appreciate having the opportunity to share my story. And I say that because I think it's so important for everybody to have the opportunity to share their story. And it's the reason why I'm doing this podcast is I want to help others be able to share their stories. And so the more that you share your story and I'm able to share my story, it empowers others to share their story. So like I covered in the first episode when we introduced, myself, I was homeschooled 12 years. I lived very much in an isolated world. And, I'm not really sure sometimes how to start like that. There's so many different angles that you can start with the homeschool and just kind of the isolation bubble. Uh, you know, I've been on this journey of writing a book about my life. And I was like, and so I'm thinking I'm going to try that for this episode tonight, kind of hit it from a couple of different topics. I'm making it more topical on that because it's so like, there's so many different things that when it comes to it. And since we're talking primarily about homeschool, I thought I'm just going to start talk a little bit about education and how that impacted me, and then I'll dive into a couple other topics to the story. So it might be a little bit different go around than the last few episodes with your stories, but I think maybe that can be helpful. So, I think when I started, I'm number 3 of 6, and I've often described myself as 2.0. Mom and dad kind of tried it one way with the first 2 and kind of tweaked some things, and then they had a little bit of extra time, and then they threw me in, and there's actually a little bit more space between me and Krista too, so she might have been 3.0. I'm not sure.
So you weren't really a middle child. You were sort of like a second batch of the oldest child sort of personality.
I would say so. I very much identified to the older child kind of traits and leadership in the family. The youngest 2, I'm 14 years older than the one below Krista and 16 years older than the youngest one. But it very much took on an older child kind of persona through that. My older sister and I see things very similar lenses as an older child, and I feel more naturally drawn toward that leadership first child type of personality. And I think all of my siblings agree with that. Krista's shaking her head. I can typically I talked enough with our oldest sister. She always agrees with me. If she disagrees, she's wrong. And her and I have been very close. And even growing up, we were actually pretty close, even with 6 years of difference between us. I would say that I was the closest with her. I felt like, I don't know if she felt the same way, but she was the one that I spent the most time with growing up. And so I'll get to that part of the story. But education was kind of try this method again. But I remember grade school was very much mom kind of came in and she had a new vigor. She had figured out how she was going to do preschool, kindergarten, I don't really have, it's all really fuzzy. I don't really get it. My kids are going through that, and I'm kind of oh, you do that stuff? Because context for those maybe I'd listen to other episodes, my wife's a public school teacher, and my world is kind of education now because all her friends are education people, and then my kids are hugely immersed in education because everything is education in my house now because I live and breathe teacher world with my wife. And so I remember like some of the methods my mom did, like doing sandpaper letters and things, and her getting, yeah, it was some type of if you can feel it and see it type of like a multi-sensory learning method that she had learned. And I don't know, it
You were
probably works.
tracing letters on sandpaper?
Yeah,
You
well,
know what? I actually
she cut them
remember.
out. She cut them out with stencils, like A, and you would, well, it was a stencil, and so you would say A, and then you would trace it with your finger, and it was like a multi-sensory thing. So you were tracing, saying it, and feeling it all at the same time. I don't. There must have been some research on it because it was like a really big deal. I think she might have done it with
Homeschool
others.
seminar.
I,
Homeschool
Quite
convention.
possibly she went and taught this at a seminar too, because she did do some speaking engagements for some of the local conventions and stuff. So that was kind of like some of my earliest memories, but I also remember her being like very stressed out about the whole process, like just like beside herself, angry. And I internalized that a lot as a kid. Like, I must be really bad because mom's always really, really upset about me not understanding the concept or understanding the word or how I hold the pencil or all of these different things. And she was really focused on discipline and really driving that home and me not questioning things. And, I think, I look at my son who, he's instantly distracted by the most random of things that pop into his mind about the cartoon character he just thought of that, did such and such. And I'm like, we're talking about completely different things. Like, we live on different planets sometimes, and thinking like the only way I keep his attention is not being frustrated with him. It's she, I look at those times and say she must have had so much whatever was going on in her brain that she was so frustrated that she was like not able to really focus on the education, because it wasn't push these buttons like the book said and the kid instantly learns. I was not necessarily an easy learner at those times. I've always been very much of an independent learner, which works very well in homeschooling, but I fear that many are not independent learners. I was very fortunate that I was a little bit of an independent learner. So when I could get her to go away from me and leave me alone, I was able to learn. And that was, kind of after third or fourth grade, when she kind of just was getting a little bit more beyond her, and we just kind of had to really rely on the textbook. So education for me was very much, here's a book, here's paper, here's pencil. Computers did not come into play for me. So my education started about 94, 95-ish, in that area. And I graduated officially in 2007. And so computers probably didn't come into play into the education till about 2003-ish, until we really started using that. And that was pretty light. And it was mostly like middle school is kind of like a fuzzy thing for me. Okay, you have a question.
Yes. So my question is, you mentioned that you were sort of seen as like education 2.0, like your mom figured it out with your older siblings. She hasn't figured it out with you, but then she's really angry because you're not getting it. What was that discrepancy like?
I wasn't learning like my older siblings.
Okay.
And I think that was the big challenge for her. I question her all the time. I'm a big questioner person, which on one level now in my adult life makes me a really good like investigator, makes me like a really good coach and manager and entrepreneur and stuff. Because somebody will say something and I'll say, what does that mean? Or why do you say it like that? Or why are you doing that? Parents have a really hard time, I think, in the homeschool world when you read the Gothard book or the whoever book, and it says you're going to do it this way. And the kids should never question you because they're questioning your authority. They're questioning God when they question you. And that's what, Dobson and a lot of those said at that time.
Yeah.
And I just loved to ask questions. And she was not really able to ever kill that in me. I
Mm-hmm.
just questioned her to no end. Like, I think until she just couldn't deal with it. I can't really speak for her, but I think I was difficult to her in that way. Whereas like my son is questions everything now, and I just love it because I was like, sometimes I'm like, that's a really good question. Have no idea. Let's go discover it together. I think it's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't something that she really anticipated in that. So as things progressed, yeah, I think she was really able to kind of help me kind of be a part of that education scheme, probably until about eighth grade. But
Mm-hmm.
education very much was about we need to hit these kind of goals so that we can satisfy the state requirements and nothing more. So I never took a standardized test, was I was not required uh, during my entire first 12 years. I never took a standardized
Wow.
test. My first standardized test was at 18. I took the ACT on my own initiative. That was the first standardized test I ever had taken in my life. And I did poorly on the standardized test, not because I didn't understand the content. I had never had the practice for test pacing.
Mm.
So I didn't know how to pace a test because the only tests per se I had as much time as I wanted on said test to get done. So
And you
we
probably had
would
to fill out the grading rubric for yourself too.
in high school definitely. She did grade in elementary and in middle school, but yeah, so it was basically read the chapter, do the chapter test, and if you didn't know it, go back and try to find the information. It was very much self-study and everything. And then we would present those tests to a certified teacher who would sign off on it, and that was how you got passed for the next year. That's at least how it worked in the state of Ohio. I believe that still is how it works today. Uh
Wow. I'm
so
just shaking my head no. I'm like, what?
I I don't know how. I mean, somebody could probably tell me how that works today. I've not really investigated how that works or doesn't work these days, but yeah, you would just present that work to a teacher. Typically, at the end of the year, they'd go through the work, they would sign off on the paper, and it was really on there. From my understanding, it was really kind of like their license was on the line too in that method. So that being said, I did learn things, but it really did come down to me wanting to learn things. I was very interested in wanting to learn things, wanting to learn more. I remember like in maybe middle school, I was like, hey, I really like the idea of chemistry and I want to learn more about chemistry. Like, can I take a chemistry like course?
Mm-hmm.
And it was this whole, I don't know, kind of hubbub blow up thing, whatever. And they got me like a chemistry kit where I had all the little chemicals and I could do all the little experiments and stuff. But this had to be like outside of my normal time. Like I really wanted to do the things. I don't know, like the things you see in chemistry lab, right? But they were like, well, you can't dissect the mouse. We're not doing that. And there was like certain lessons I was not able to do in it. And I really just wanted to play with that stuff and see how those things worked. So I think, and what kind of led me into my career path was the kind of the cleaner, more hygienic things was like it was okay to tear apart electronics and put them back together. And so that's, for those who don't know, I own a IT service company now, and I started in middle school. I would tear down cassette tape players and I would put them back together. And then I got really interested in radio because I didn't have a lot of like outlets, and this was kind of pre-internet for us. So my really only connection to the outside world was then radio. So I figured out how to do one of those little FM transmitter things, and I set up my own little radio station in the attic, and I actually still have cassette tapes. So that was my pre-podcasting days. I'm frightened sometime to go back and listen to some of those recordings of myself. So, question.
Not even a question. It's more about a statement. Not only did he make the cassette tapes, he was a businessman very early on because he would then set up a table and sell said cassette tapes to me and my brother and my sister and my parents.
It was a limited market, though.
And I have 3 cassette tapes that I purchased that I still have ownership of.
I'm gonna
that I know
need
are
those
going to be
back.
worth a lot someday.
Wow.
I'm gonna need those back.
So the sales trend and the entrepreneurship was there for a very long time. And it wasn't the first time he made a business that we purchased things from him. It happened multiple times. Anyways, I just wanted to
make an appearance on a future podcast.
That's
because when he finally
I've been
started his own
afraid.
business, I wasn't surprised.
So I have the original cassette tapes, and I've been afraid to digitize them because cassette tapes, if anybody remembers, they're really, really volatile, and they like go apart and everything. And I got really good at fixing them. However, I'm very concerned, like when I go to try to digitize them, like one's going to get chewed up or something. And if you don't know what chewed up means, you are too young for this podcast.
That's right. Okay,
but
on the radio thing.
What's that?
Quick comment / question. Do you guys remember the BBN Bible Broadcast Network radio station?
Sounds familiar.
Does that ring a bell? They had the Captain's Club radio show, and they had.
I think I remember Captain's Club
story time or something like that.
So there's a radio personality. Sorry, Krista. There's a radio personality based out of Cleveland. His name was Mark Zimmerman, and he went national with it in the early and late 90s, early 2000s with this thing called Tunes. And he went national with his program. And we got to go meet him because he was Cleveland based. So it was a homeschool trip. And we had nothing better to do in our lives. But he was like, I think he had those people as a part of his show at one point. They looked at like merging. I don't know. I forget what it is, but I think that's my like connection to that. I didn't have a lot of connection to the outside world, but he was safe to listen to. We listened to him every Saturday morning.
Mm-hmm. There you go. There was a lot of shows on there like Adventures in Odyssey, Jungle Gym. What was it? Patch the Pirate. There was another one though. It was like little woodland creatures. I forget what it was called now.
Are you thinking of Ranger Bill?
I do remember we did have Ranger Bill, but no, it was
there was little woodland creatures, and then there was the ministry out of Michigan that did the little radio show too, and then they made a new version of it.
Oh yeah, the Bible, Moody Bible, like where they would do like missionary biographies and stuff.
Well, Moody had stuff like that, but there was a group out of Michigan that did their own thing too.
Your Story Hour.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And then oh no, did you listen to Alan Root? He was like the Christian teenager middle school music
rock star.
Yeah, but they would play star. There was another guy, Chip Richter. Oh my gosh, I can't even believe I just.
Well, he's more of a regional guy. Well, he might have come out to Virginia. Who knows? He was a Cleveland-based guy. He still exists. I think he's 150 years old. That's probably true. Like all of these people exist, and these were like positive influences, like in my life. Like every once in a while, because I work in the Cleveland market, I run into Mark Zimmerman, Krista.
Oh, I didn't even know.
He's on the radio still. Like he went to a different station, and I was like, "Do you remember me?" And he's always like, "Yes, I do," but I don't think he does because I think he says like, all the kids.
Really? Okay. I appreciate the lies. The lies are nice.
So he can't lie. He knows Jesus. So that was kind of like, so getting back to like the idea of education and like I had nightmares for the longest time that like I did not finish high school. Like because when you finish high school, you don't get like a GED. We got this diploma that mom and dad signed off on that somebody notarized. So my diploma says May 1st, 2007 on it for whatever that's worth. But the document was printed in 2003 because they got a better deal to print all 4 at the same time. And got them all notarized at that same time. You know.
By the way, I still don't have mine. So
I will find mine from time to time. It's in a box somewhere.
So
I never received mine, so as far as I know, I haven't actually officially graduated.
So I went and took the ACT. The local community college helped me figure that one out. And I went and took the ACT and I passed it. So I just took that as a validation of, yes, good job. You know enough to get into college. And then I did take some college out of my own pocket. And because my parents did not believe in college, and they said, if you're going to waste your money on that, it's going to be your money, not ours. So,
oh, wow.
That's a whole nother.
Like, you're a man.
Now I'm a man, I guess. So, but that was a big challenge back then. And I think it's still a thing today. I think it's up until 26. You have to report your parents' income to get the grant money. And that was the only way I was paying for it, was the grant money. And it became such a challenge at a point that they would not give me their tax returns. I ended up just giving up on college because I couldn't afford it out of pocket, because I couldn't get the grant money. So, and I couldn't get the tax returns. So I just gave up, saved my money. And I started my business I have today. I think it was like 26. I don't know how old I was. Around that time, I was just like, I gave up trying to go to college at 24 because it was just it was a fight every single year. I tried it for 1 year without the grant money, paying it out of my own pocket. And it was just going to be so slow because I could really only afford like one class a semester. So I would be like graduating with an associate's degree now. That's how slow I was going to be going. Like that. And the courses changed faster than that. It was going to be something crazy, like mid-30s until I could graduate doing it on that pace. And I couldn't handle that. So my path with education kind of ended slowly there and just focused on really just personal development and just basically the school of hard knocks for that. So that was really the challenge. I look at homeschooling and say, like, some people say they're really serious about the education point about it. And I'm glad they are, but education was really more about what they can control and how they saw it, and really just do the minimum that you have to do and nothing more was my educational path with that. And I really didn't even realize when I got to college about how little I didn't learn in high school. Like, I honestly took algebra 4 times. I took it 3 times in high school and then a 4th time in college because I didn't get the concepts until I got to college. I had somebody sit down with me and actually help me through the concepts. And it was such a big issue in that community college. They basically had to dedicate like 2 huge, like 200-person computer labs, all day long, 5 days a week. It was such a huge problem in my area there were a lot of homeschoolers, and then there were some other, things, but there was a lot of homeschoolers I ran into that were just like, had not been prepared. It just kind of like fell, especially in the math piece, in homeschooling, where they were like, you didn't understand this concept back in, middle school. So how are you supposed to understand how X plus Y equals Z if you didn't understand this foundational topic here? And so, like, I would say it wasn't even until like, I'm going to say 20 years old, I could not do percentages without that percent key on a calculator. Like, I just did not understand the concept of it for the longest time. Like, it was just like a blocker in my mind.
That's such severe educational neglect.
Yeah.
So severe.
And it was like, because the curriculum like told me, but I had to move on. Like, we had to like progress in the curriculum to get the thing done. So I just kind of like figured out a way to crutch around it and moved on with my life. And then when I get to college and they're like testing me like on math, and you've got to take some remedial math, and they were like, it's okay. Basically, at that point, they had a computer program that would just basically figure out where I was at and then take me to where I needed to go. And it was amazing. I learned so many different concepts. But on the other hand, I loved geometry. Like, geometry was like one of my favorite subjects in school. So like, I came out of high school I started my own landscaping company out of high school, and I was selling patios and retaining walls, which take a lot of geometry. As far as I know, they're all still standing.
No one's died from a collapsed patio wall.
Correct. But it takes a lot of geometry to put that stuff together. But I really like geometry, and I figured it out. There was no percentages involved now. Now, I come into this world where I live now. I use percentages every single day in the world I'm in now. And because I have to do a lot of accounting and all that type of stuff, but I have spreadsheets. But I actually understand how the spreadsheet works, I'm telling you. So so it was just a lot of like I had to work to understand what I do today. And it really wasn't based on any teacher necessarily. I think that's true for anybody. I think everybody has to do the work too, but really those foundational times, they really fell short. And it is a reflection on the parents, but it's not a reflection on the fact that they needed to know all of it, but they just weren't willing to go ask for help. And I think that's what they needed to do. They needed to go ask for help, and they did not do that.
As I was listening to you, I thought it was just kind of ironic that, probably my guess is that the homeschoolers who are getting the remedial math help from the community college, their parents would probably say, oh, we're educating our kids because it's the parents' job and it's not the government's job to educate our children. And here you have down the road a whole remedial math program set up for these homeschoolers.
Right.
Irony.
Exactly. And I will say, it was probably not all homeschoolers, but there was an awful lot of us in that room. Yeah. I'm just saying, like, it was probably like an 80-20 split. We all got the same inside jokes, just saying. So, like, we had our world, and like the instructors were like, we have no idea what they're talking about, but we're just trying to hear them teach them math. So that was interesting. But I'm going to roll it back now and talk a little bit about church life in my homeschool world. So talked a little bit about education, but let's talk about church. Church was a really weird thing for me growing up. And maybe church and religion, I'd like to maybe contrast these two there. So my parents were really big on that it is God's like command that they homeschool. Like they believe that it was the right thing to do.
Yes.
And God bless you if you believe that. God bless you. You're setting yourself up for a lot of work. And I'm hoping that some of my story can help you navigate a little bit better. I never went to a children's class at church like my kids do. Like we would go to church. We would go to church and they would have like children's church or children's Sunday school. I think there might have been times that I visited, but then we didn't do that anymore. I always sat in the pew. So I've never like gone to a kids group to my recollection. I've always sat in the pew. I've listened to a lot of really what I would summarize as angry pastors yell about the fire and brimstone of God and how I need to repent. And I got saved many times.
You get a punch card.
Yeah. Well, it's like one of those frequent flyer coffee cards they used to have.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, you get a punch every time. So I listened to a lot of like since I was very, very young. And then it was kind of like we would go to a church, and my parents were very adamant King James only people too. So add that to the mix with everything else too.
Wow.
So we would go to a church, and if they would leave the King James, they would move on. And that was typically their reason for moving on. There were some church experiences like before I was really old enough to understand something happened with some church, some drama, and they left there. They went to another one. They kind of got stuck on this King James thing at that point.
Is that independent fundamentalist Baptist?
You can find it a couple places. I think that's where it's kind of landed at this point. You're going to find it a lot in the Baptist church. I've run into some other non-denominational, maybe there's even a few Pentecostals out there that are that too, that are using the King James and are King James only. But they would kind of stick there, and then we did this home church thing too. So we would be home church, homeschooled. But we would normally home church with a group of other people who were typically homeschoolers. But we wouldn't really talk to the other kids. And a lot of the home church experience was sitting there, and whoever hosted that week, because we would travel to different houses, and whoever hosted, the father of that house would prepare some type of message, and it'd be kind of similar to a home Bible study type of thing, and maybe you'd sit around and sing. And remember the first one we went to, I was pretty young. I don't even know. I'm not even sure. It was probably, Krista was pretty dang young, like pretty young. I can't even tell you, like maybe walking. I'm not even sure. But like that was my earliest recollection of like that type of church, like little song books and singing these songs, and somebody would shout, "I want to sing number blah blah blah," and that's kind of how the order went. And then so and so would bring a little message, and it was usually felt like 3 hours, which maybe it was.
It was 3 hours.
Yeah, and then you would share a lunch, and then you would all go home. And
lunches were always good. Lunches were phenomenal.
So we did that, and then the first one we went to, they decided that the group collectively decided that they wanted to hire a pastor, which probably in their own right, like there was probably counseling, working in the ministry some now at this point in my life. And I have served as an elder in a church at this point in my life now where I'm speaking from. You probably need somebody, because I'm talking at this point, there was probably close to 20 families connected in this little home church that grew pretty quickly. Oh, wow. Actually, this church still exists, this original one we went to.
How would they squeeze everyone into one house?
That's a good question. A lot of people. Yeah. They were big houses, and it was kind of got to the point where there's only like one or two houses they could really go to with this many people. So like, we need a pastor. We should probably consider a building. Like, this is getting out of hand. So my parents were kind of like, this might not be for us, because they're going to get a pastor in a building, and that's not really for us. So they kind of pulled away from that. And it's funny, we kind of went on this like journey for a little while, and my grandmother was dying, my mom's mom. And so she was spending a lot of time with that. And so kind of the easy way for them to do, they just went to an organized church for a while. It was a Baptist church that had the King James. And we just kind of went there for a while. We were visitors, and we always were very clear that we were visitors, and we would never join, because church membership is not biblical, because you will not find the word church membership in the Bible.
I've never heard that before.
Oh, really? Okay. That could be a whole episode.
Yeah.
Might be beyond the scope of our conversation. So it's kind of like splitting hairs, really, where I'm at with church membership. But yeah, so that we were visitors, and we did that for a while until grandma died, and mom was able to kind of come back, because grandma lived about 300 miles away. So she had to drive there. She would be gone for weeks at a time. So it was really hard for her to kind of fight that battle. And so we just kind of like, that's what we did for a little while. But once grandma passed, and she was able to kind of refocus her attention back at home again. Krista has a question. Sorry.
No, I have a question. It's more of just like a quick interjection. Also I just wanted to throw out there for the education piece. While mom was gone, we were pretty much homeschooling each other at that point. Like, I wasn't, because I was the youngest, but like my sister, oldest brother, and Nate, like it was a whole collection of us all working together to get our schoolwork done, because dad didn't really participate in any kind of the education piece at all. So like while she was gone, this was a large portion of time where we started to learn that we were kind of on our own in our education, and that like it was up to each of us as kind of like the four of us to make sure we were all equally educated and getting our schoolwork done. And you don't realize like how much pressure that puts on the older siblings until like you're reflecting back on it. So I wanted to throw that piece out there real quick.
I love how you're like, it is absolutely biblical to homeschool. We will never consider another form of education. Right. And then it's like, sorry, kids, you are on your own when it comes to college.
Yeah. I mean, his only involvement really during even that time, like it was really like, I think 2.5-ish years that mom was driving back and forth like a lot and taking care. Because my grandmother passed, and then my grandfather also had open heart surgery at the same time. So there was a lot of like caregiving between her and her sisters, and they would like there was 3 of them. So she would be there for a week, and the other sister would take a week. And so they would go on these 3-week rotations. And often they took my brother, who's, the next one up for me, with her. And so he would be gone for the entire week. So that's kind of how I grew a lot closer to my older sister at the time. And we very much formed an alliance at that point. Mm-hmm. And I was dealing with a lot of anger at that point. So that was like that 9, maybe more like 7 to 9, 10-ish range for me when all of this was happening. It's pretty formative time for me. I was forming a lot of opinions about the world. And there wasn't a lot of people to talk to me about these things. Mm-hmm. A lot of wrong things happened to me during these periods of time too. And so there was just a lot of very, very challenging things going on, and then kind of throwing this church element in there as well. So we're kind of like floating around, and I'm like really interested in like the Bible, because I'm kind of being told at home and I'm being told at church, like, read your Bible. So I read, because what else am I going to know? I'm going to read, I'm going to like figure things, and I'm like Mr. Question, all the question the world, question everything kind of guy. Like, if anybody was a liberal in the family, it was me, because I'm quite liberals. Technically, I think that was like the definition of that family is liberals questions, conservatives just go with the flow. And so I was, just kind of accused of being like the rebellious one, always like questioning everything. But I'm reading this stuff too, trying to figure this stuff out, reading thee and thous, and I'm like really confused because that's not how everything else is read, and trying to follow all the rules. And then, so after all of this happens, grandma passes, grandpa's okay, things were, and I wasn't really close with these grandparents. I was much closer with my dad's parents, who lived about 5 miles from us, so much closer with them. And so mom kind of comes back and reintegrates into our world, which was kind of weird, because I was like, well, we kind of lived without you for the most part. And when she was home, she was like stressed and trying to catch up and all of these things, and fighting with dad and fighting with my grandmother, her mother-in-law. Just, there was a lot of drama.
Strife.
And so I mostly just tried to hide during these years. And then she comes back and she's like, gonna re-engage here. And so we left that church we were going to. I wanted to get baptized because I thought, well, at that point I had decided I was a Christian. I was not. But I wanted to get baptized because that seemed like the right path for me to go. Because all they talked about was baptism. Like, you got to repent and you got to get baptized. I was like, well, I repented, so I'm going to get baptized. I want to like follow this thing. Well, it was their line was, mom was okay if we got baptized, but she wanted them to change their policy, because they were like, well, the only way we baptize people in this church is you become a member. We only baptize members. That was their thing.
Oh no.
So she was like, and so the pastor took it as an opportunity to kind of bring the whole family in and try to put them on the right course. I think that was really his objective. Ultimately, my parents just decided we needed to leave altogether. We went into another home church. And then that pastor actually got called out a year later for having an affair with his secretary, which is a whole nother story. So it was probably for the best, but yeah, that's an interesting, there was a whole mess there. So they were like, see, that place was just an unholy place. So we never really went into an organized church again as a family, kind of following that period. We went to this home church thing, and it was more like run by my parents. They had found another family that we were it was probably the family we were the closest with growing up. It was a woman that my dad went to public high school. He had gone to school with this woman. They had ultimately started to homeschool with her husband, and they had connected later, and my mom and her had become friends and stuff, and kind of had some similar ideals and values and everything, it appeared. So they decided to try the homeschool thing, home church thing together. So we did a lot with them during that time. And this was probably my middle and early high school days that we did. So I think from like 10 to like 15, we homeschooled with them, or a home church with them, and did almost like a mini co-op with them a little bit too. It was them and a few other families would kind of float in. And that was about the closest thing that I got to like a real, like, kind of like what I would call a normal homeschool experience, where you have like some co-op things going on. things like that.
Consider other kids.
Yeah, like actually talked with the kids and played with them and got in trouble with them, and like that I would consider two of those kids my oldest friends to this day. Whenever we see each other, and it's just like we start over like we've never like left each other. So it's those two brothers and stuff. And so it's really neat. So so that's probably the closest thing I'll ever have to like a friend that I grew up with. I mean, the one boy, like I have known him probably since we were like my daughter's age, but she's about 3. But this was the time when we kind of like formed like a more friendship bond. And so that meant a lot. And I don't know, there was some type of drama that happened during those time, and we separated from them, and they wanted to go to this other organized church, and my parents didn't have any interest in that, and so we just started doing church kind of all by ourselves as a family unit, a home.
Wow.
Which was super hard, super awkward. And we had some people come in and some people go, and they would kind of come in, and I think it was weird for them. Like they would try it for a few weeks, and they really okay, we're kind of done. But then it was just kind of always at our house. We didn't really go anywhere else. Sometimes we would try going somewhere else, but it just didn't really seem to go anywhere. I didn't really, wasn't a thing for me to question. So yes.
What was your parents' experience prior to them getting married, or maybe early in their marriage, that led to such a distrust of formal organizations? Because that is so extreme. So extreme.
They were both raised Lutheran.
Okay.
They both they got married. It was okay to get married because they were both Lutheran. But I really don't know what led to the distrust. So I apologize for anybody out there. I'm very there's 2 different major strains of Lutheran, and I believe that they were in separate strains of Lutheranism. My father being in more of the conservative, my mom would be what we probably consider more liberal.
Oh, forbidden love.
But they were Lutheran, and that was okay. My personal opinion is there just was no salvation there at all. So they were just lost people trying to do lost things is really what it is. Because they really, my last conversation about these things with them, they did not understand salvation, period. And this was, at 30 years old, I had a conversation with them about this. So interjection.
Wow. I do think that maybe some of it comes from I think the biggest motivator for a lot of the directions we went in our family was our mom. And if you look back on like my mom, she moved a lot as a kid. And the her family, the relationship with their siblings, relationship with their parents was very dysfunctional, very unhealthy. And so I think that my mom motivates a lot of the direction, even though like the man is supposed to be in charge of the house. Ultimately, my mom was the one that made the decisions, and then my dad just kind of went, "This is what we're doing." And so I think a lot of that flows over because still to this day, our parents do that. I've probably since I've gotten married, I've seen our parents switch to 3 to 4 different kinds of walks of Christian faith, something like it changes every couple years. And so it's a pattern that's been there like their whole marriage. And I think a lot of it comes from like just my mom's probably my mom's life, and just like how she didn't stay in spaces for very long because their family moved a lot. And I think that might have just like flowed over into everything else we did. And it's still happening now. Like, well, it's still happening now.
Yeah. And I'm going to cover what I think is some more of that in a few minutes, but, yeah. So ultimately kind of to finish up that church experience quickly, my older brother, who kind of got a lot of what he wanted, because he was who he was, the oldest son. convinced my parents that we would never meet girls at home.
Thank God for that.
Fair point. That's a fair point.
So we needed to go to a church. So there had been a church at one point that was King James only, about 25 minutes from home, that he convinced my parents that it would be okay for him and I to go to on Sundays.
To meet girls.
And so we never met any girls there. Okay. I got baptized in that church, which I haven't gotten around to sharing my salvation testimony that I think is important to this story. But I got baptized in that church and they didn't make me become a member to do that, which I thought was interesting. They weren't really concerned about it. The pastor knew my story, and they were kind of like, we really want to do members, but he kind of did me a kind of like a favor. Like, I think it was like a really big God that he did that. But it was funny. So then there's King James only guy, big BJU guy.
Oh, geez.
Shows up from the Cleveland area. We're about an hour outside of Cleveland, for reference, where I grew up, and shows up in my neighborhood at this little local church. And my mom's like, ooh, the King James only guy. We're saved. We're going to go over to his church. You should check it out. I went over, and of course, 2-3 minutes down the road, it's easier for me to go to church there. And I went to youth group for the first time at 19, which was weird. And Krista actually went with me for a little bit. And I just kind of like loved the idea of like being around people and learned a lot about it. And then the pastor and my mom, like, man, when they butted heads so horribly. I mean, he even said to me one time, your mother is a difficult woman. Sir, you have no idea. You have no idea. So my parents left that, went back to their little home church thing, and I stayed there, which ultimately got me kicked out of the house. So for the best. It's a really, really cool story that happened there. But kind of that was the growing up church experience, was just ultimately, no matter what you did, they were wrong. We had to stay in our own lane and go our own way. And so I kind of, at 19, came into, I think, the world that a lot of homeschoolers kind of lived in. So I came from this really extreme side. I needed to come like basically through your world a little bit, Lydia, to go into the real world. So it was kind of like this weird passageway that I went through. So I got to experience a little bit of like what that flavor of Christianity was. And I'm not saying they were all like unbiblical. I haven't landed exactly where they are like in practice, but I think that there's definitely like people who love Jesus in that world. They just make their life a little bit more difficult and add a lot of extra rules, and they're very pharisaical in that lane. But God bless them, though they're probably perfected in heaven and have it all figured out. I hope that I'll see many of them there, and they say, oh man, we made it too hard on ourselves and the rest of our parishioners, is my hope and prayer for them. But yeah, like church was such like a foreign thing. Like, it just didn't understand like how this world works and really understanding biblical authority. And I feel like it's really just given me like, I question everything anyways. And like, I still question even more now, because I've seen like such the very isolated, dark side of that. I really appreciate you listening to Life in the Bubble today and joining myself and Lydia and Krista and just joining the conversation about growing up homeschooled. I hope that you follow us on all of the wonderful social media channels that are out there. Listen for more episodes as we continue to discuss the conversation around homeschooling on Life in the Bubble.